In 1994, Steve Vai collaborated with Ozzy Osbourne. They were recording songs for Ozzy's 1995 album, Osmosis. Although Vai wrote a bunch of songs for this Ozzy record, the only song which remained on the album was My Little Man, and Zakk Wylde played guitar on it. So why didn't Vai and Ozzy's collaboration work out? Well, in a 2023 interview with E! On Music, Steve Vai said that he was sitting on a whole Ozzy record, adding that he couldn't do anything with the material because he didn't have any rights to it. Here's what he said: "I don't have any control over it or rights to it, obviously, but we did record some pretty good stuff. The interesting thing about the stuff we recorded from a guitar perspective is all of my rhythm guitar parts. I use an octave divider, and that record doesn't sound like anything else." But then, in a social media post, Steve Vai apologized and said that while there was enough music written for a whole album, the songs were never completed and would require re-recording before being released to the public. And this is what Vai said: "In a recent interview, I spoke a bit carelessly about sitting on an entire Ozzy album, and then the clickbait headlines went viral." He clarified that he and Ozzy got back together back in 1994 and spent some time trying to come up with some potential songs for an album that he already had half recorded. That record later came out as Osmosis. They demoed a handful of tracks, and then there was a bunch of tracks Vai built for Ozzy to check out. The only song Ozzy chose was My Little Man. The song was re-recorded with Zakk Wylde. Only one other demoed track from those sessions had an Ozzy scratch vocal on it. Steve handed in all the master demo tapes to the label and kept safety tapes of the tracks he personally built. So there was enough music for a whole record, but it was just demos. In 1995 interview with journalist Mark Allen, Vai said that the reason he dropped out of the project was that the demos he did with Ozzy scared the record company. According to Steve, he was using C tunings with the octave divider, and the record company said to Ozzy and Sharon, "Get rid of Vai." Well, Steve Vai is always very diplomatic about the people he worked with. However, according to Bob Daisley, that was Sharon's trick to get rid of him. And here's what Bob Daisley revealed in a 2018 interview on the Classic Rock Revisited website. In 1994, Ozzy got hooked up with Steve Vai. Steve came in and played guitar and co-wrote everything with Ozzy. They were looking for bass players who sounded like me. Steve Vai said, "Ozzy, why don't you just get Bob Daisley to come in?" So they got me in. We started in Steve's studio in Los Angeles, and then we went to CBS studios to write and rehearse, but it wasn't really working out between Ozzy and Steve. Instead of firing him and doing it the right way and saying, "Steve, it is not working out," Sharon came in and said, "Sony has pulled the plug on the project. There is no album to be done." I thought, what a load of crap. Dean Castronova said to me, "Oh no, it is not going to happen." And he got all depressed. I said, "Dean, don't worry. We will hear from them in a couple of days. This is just a ploy to get rid of Steve Vai." The phone call came a couple days later, and that is when they started talking to Zakk. They kept me hanging around for months as I was supposed to do the album. They changed their mind again and got Geezer Butler in to do it. And I thought, oh no, thanks a lot. I said, "Hey Sharon, how about a cancellation fee?" I had already had $5,000 up front, and she said, "I will give you another $5,000. That is a $10,000 cancellation fee." They never ever paid me that other $5,000, those bastards. That's typical Osbournes, right? In a 2005 interview by Beth Price for Rock Detector, Bob Daisley said, "I had been asked to play on the next record for Ozzy in 1994, and had allotted the time for it to be messed up yet again with "we're using Geezer Butler now instead of you," after I'd put in weeks of preparation and rehearsals, not to mention turning down other work I'd been offered for that period. And Sharon promised me a cancellation fee. Do you think I got it? Hang on, there's a pig flying over. Steve was still owed for the use of his studio, but neither got paid nor played on the record. So, according to Bob Daisley, when Steve Vai was writing with Ozzy in the CBS studios in New York, all of a sudden it all fizzled out and the plug was pulled by Sharon. Why could this happen? Well, actually, in a 2024 interview with Dean Del Rey, Steve Vai revealed that while writing with Ozzy in the CBS studios in New York, he and Ozzy had a little disagreement about who was writing what. At that point, Steve Vai was very protective about publishing and writer rights, and here's what Steve recalls. Ozzy and I were supposed to write this stuff. A musician came in who was working with us, and he started submitting ideas. And I was naive, and I said to Ozzy, "What's the situation here? I was under the impression that you and I are writing this." And Ozzy, in his innocent brilliance, said, "I don't give a crap if he comes down here and writes something. We just need a good song." And that was the end of my publishing demon, Steve said. By publishing demon, Steve Vai meant his obsession over publishing and writing rights. Well, Steve's situation is similar to Jake E. Lee's. Apparently, when Steve started claiming his publishing, Sharon found out about it and got rid of him. Then they called Zach, and the album was rewritten. On the other hand, maybe Steve Vai regrets that he wasn't flexible enough with Ozzy and Sharon. With Ozzy, he could get more popular and make more money afterwards. As Lemmy once said, "I made more money out of writing those 4 songs for Ozzy than I made out of 15 years of Motorhead." Ludicrous, isn't it? According to Steve Vai, he and Ozzy recorded a lot of stuff and it's on the shelf, but it would have been too expensive and too time-consuming for Steve to do the entire record with Ozzy. In a 2023 interview with E! On Music, Steve Vai confessed that when they almost recorded a whole album, the record label said, "What are you doing? No, you've just got to take a song from Vai and finish a record. We're already into this for much money, and Vai is expensive." So, Steve tells different stories about why it didn't work out with Ozzy, and the story told by Bob Daisley sounds more plausible. But who wrote the lyrics to My Little Man? Officially, the song was written by Ozzy Osbourne and Steve Vai. However, when Motorhead frontman Lemmy died on the 28th of September in 2015, Steve Vai revealed that the lyrics to My Little Man were written by Lemmy. This is what Steve said in 2015 upon hearing the news of Lemmy's death at the age of 70. "I wrote a song with Lemmy and Ozzy called My Little Man. That appears on Ozzy's Osmosis record. Lemmy wrote the lyrics. If you listen to the lyrics, you can glean an insight into the deep softness that was comfortably resting under the external persona. The song is deeply touching, and when I met Lemmy's son Paul, I realized how sincere those lyrics are."